Alright, so in this video we're continuing our discussion of ARC Section 90A for the review of financial statements, and in this particular video we'll be discussing what to do when there's a change in the engagement from an audit to a review. So it turns out we have performed a lot of our audit procedures because we were engaged to perform an audit, and then all of a sudden the client tells us that they prefer to have a review instead of an audit. Then we need to go through a number of steps which we discuss here in ARC Section 90A.86 through 90. So let's go through those now. First, it says if we were engaged to perform an audit engagement in accordance with GAS, so the generally accepted auditing standards, but then we were requested to change the engagement to a review engagement, then we should consider the following before deciding whether to agree to that change. So we should consider the reason given for the request, particularly the implications of a restriction on the scope of the audit engagement, whether imposed by management or by circumstances. We should also consider the additional audit effort required to complete the audit engagement, and we should also consider the estimated additional cost to complete the audit engagement. So we need to find out why the client wants us to change from an audit or a review and decide whether that's a reasonable reason. It may turn out that the client had misunderstood the difference between an audit and review, and once we started auditing them, they felt like that was too much, or that's not what their regulator or their bank or whoever was requesting all that they needed to do was a review. And so in that case, that might be a reasonable reason for us to change to a review. But from this statement, they're implying that if the reason is that they want to change to review is to lessen the scope of the engagement, that might imply that there's something wrong with the financial statements that we were starting to dig into, or they want to limit our access to certain accounts, and that might not be a good reason to change to a review. And also, if we're pretty substantially complete with the audit and there's not much additional cost to complete it, they're saying here that, why don't we just go ahead and complete the audit since we're almost done. And so if our procedures are substantially complete or our cost to complete is relatively insignificant, then maybe we should consider the propriety of accepting a change in the engagement, because if we start over with a review, it might be more expensive and costly to the client and our time than it would be to potentially just to finish the audit. And if it turns out that we've reviewed the reasons for the client wanting to change, and based upon our professional judgment, we believe there's a reasonable justification for the change to a review, and we've done all of the procedures necessary in a review engagement, then we should issue an appropriate review report. And nowhere in that review report should we reference the original audit engagement, or should we discuss any procedures that may have been performed in the audit, or any scope limitations that result in the changed engagement. So we would basically pretend like we had intended and performed only a review engagement from the beginning, and that the audit never existed. And finally, when we have been engaged to audit an entity's financial statements and management refuses to allow us to correspond with their legal counsel, then we should usually not accept a change to a review engagement, because that might imply, as this item right here suggested, that management might be trying to limit our access to individuals within or related to the entity, and as part of our audit, and by limiting the scope of our procedures in a review, they might be able to get by with a clean conclusion by having a review engagement instead of an audit. So let's take a look at this explanatory material here. It's A138 through A140 to get some more details on how to comply with these requirements. Okay, now we're down in explanatory material, discussing a change in the engagement from an audit to review. And so in this first one, we see that a request to change the engagement may result from a change in circumstances affecting the entity's requirement for an audit engagement. And so, for instance, as we discussed above, there might be a misunderstanding regarding the nature of an audit or review engagement. So maybe the client had misunderstood what an audit was whenever they engaged with us, and they instead had really wanted to have a review done. There also may be a situation where the client needs to restrict the scope of the audit, whether that's imposed by management or caused by certain circumstances. And so a change in circumstances that affects an entity's requirement for an audit engagement, or a misunderstanding concerning the nature of an audit or review engagement, would normally be reasonable as a basis for requesting a change in the engagement. So the client had just accidentally told us the wrong thing, or we all misunderstood what was required of them, and so let's change to review. That's okay. But if the client was actually, by changing to review, trying to restrict the scope of the audit engagement, then it could be possible that the information affected by the scope restriction might be incorrect, incomplete, or otherwise unsatisfactory. So if we started digging into the receivables and started to uncover some findings or complex matters, and management told us that they've decided to change to a review engagement, that might be suspicious for us. It might imply that they're trying to restrict the scope because some information was incorrect or incomplete. And so in that case, we might consider not accepting that engagement or that change.